A short hike is beautiful. Yep, that's it. That's my opening. Released in July of 2019 via the indie developer Adam Gryu, A Short Hike is, true to his name, a brief experience. Barely an hour or two in length depending on your playstyle. After a short introductory cutscene in which our main character appears to be extremely unenthusiastic in regards to her predicament, you take control of a somewhat troubled youngster by the name of Claire, an anthropomorphic burb girl who, upon unceremoniously being dropped off to stay with her aunt on an island for a few days, and then after spending most of her first day waiting indoors for a phone call, decides to go for a walk. She sets her sights on climbing the central mountain, because the top of the mountain is literally the only location on the island where she stands even the remotest chance of getting any phone reception. But it's maybe not for the reasons that you might expect. It quickly becomes apparent that Claire is in fact deeply concerned for her mother's condition, who is explained through various instances of dialogue to be hospitalized for an unknown reason. So when it comes to the challenge of climbing the Hawk Peak mountain, a feat that she regards as both intimidating and even somewhat dangerous, her endeavour is one entirely rooted in the hypercharged adolescent worry for a parent, who may or may not be facing something truly serious. She waits indoors sitting on her phone not because she's an introvert or because she can't be bothered to do anything else, but because she's scared that she might miss the news that she may or may not want to receive. So, as it just so happens, her aunt's suggestion of climbing the peak is twofold in helpfulness. In reaching the top of the mountain, she'll potentially receive the news that she's been desperately waiting for, while in the meantime, the journey upward also provides an effective distraction to take her mind off things for a while. That is a combined motivation and thought process that I personally find extremely relatable for reasons that I'm going to talk about later on, and so you as the player is let loose to do exactly that. However, or whichever way you want to. If you simply want to get to the end, 45 minutes of focused graft will probably get you there. And don't get me wrong, it feels really good when you finally scale that peak. It's not easy if you're unprepared. However, if you're the kind of person who wants to explore every nook and cranny of the island, crossing paths with several characters along the way and completing various side quests, you can easily clock in several hours with a short hike. And even speaking as the kind of person who really can't call themselves a completionist anymore, these are hours entirely well spent. No! No! Oh god. 21 hit. Yes! Oh, that's my new record. How do you come up with a new reward? I'm gonna give you all the money in my pocket. Holy shit! That's so much money! I don't want to take all your money. It's okay. My family's rich. In spite of it seemingly being a straightforward yet effective little game, A Short Hike really is the kind of experience that rewards what the player chooses to seek from it. If you opt to pursue your goal with the determined tunnel vision of an Olympic gymnast, go right ahead. It'll feel good to get there. But, alternatively, in taking your time to explore the contained world of the game, letting Claire meet people, solve mini-quests, and learn about the island and so forth, the act of progressing one carefree step at a time is infinitely more enjoyable. Also, before we go any further, spoilers for both the game from a general point of view, and also later on in regards to the end. I'll warn you about that later on when we get to it, but to be honest, if you're even marginally intrigued by what I've told you so far, I highly recommend playing A Short Hike as blind as possible. Okay? Good. Presented through a graphical palette mostly consisting of what the developer himself refers to as big crunchy pixels, A Short Hike's visual direction is wholeheartedly retro by nature. Alongside clear nods to the original GameCube release of Animal Crossing, there's clear similarity in absolute abundance with your PlayStation 1s or Sega Saturns of the mid-90s when it comes to A Short Hike's graphical fidelity. I kid you not, with every following second that I continue to play A Short Hike, I see visual callbacks to virtually all of the games featured throughout Decedo's tropical video game music to relax to at the beach mix, which, by the way, is fucking incredible like all of his work. I highly recommend it if you're like me and just can't get over the fact that it isn't the 90s anymore. But in spite of the fact that this game sits in amongst a massive wave of recent indie devs, all adoringly recreating your favourite Haunted PS1 beach house aesthetics, I don't think I've seen one this goddamn pretty in a long while. There are so many wonderful little visual details to enjoy throughout a short hike, like for instance the vibrant ecosystem of the island itself. From ponds to woodland to waterfalls, hot springs and so forth, all the way through to the change of perspective offered via several tourist binoculars that then let you see that ecosystem from an entirely different point of view. Or the variety of biomes, from the beach-worthy summer to rainy showers to eventually the snow-covered mountain slopes, throughout all of which dozens of anthropomorphic characters all independently roam around, their locations and interactions with Claire all organically shifting in context and relationship depending on the player's progress of the story. You can actually see some of them running around while viewing the island from certain binoculars, even from quite a significant distance, which is not only adorable, but also reinforces the impression that the world of A Short Hike is one that continues to move forwards even if the player happens to step away from it, rather than one that freezes lifelessly in place. Hell, even something as simple as the deliciously animated bow wave and the streaming bubbles that follow in the stern's wake while piloting the boat is a detail that just makes me smile. It's a really minor visual that adds just one more piece to a much more interesting, much larger environment. And it all comes together to present a world that is not only an absolute joy to explore, but also builds towards one that feels entirely lived in. From beach furniture to campfires, scattered picnic benches, discarded canoes, caravans, pop-up shops and so forth, the island is chock full of evidence that represents the livelihoods of other characters, and it's by interacting with the delightful cast of characters found throughout this game that easily makes for some of its most charming moments. And make no mistake, A Short Hike is an experience that really wants to charm you. It wants to make you smile, to make you laugh, to take the pressures of your daily life off your shoulders for just a few brief hours. And it's really good at it too. Take the various collectible items for example, which bring about near childlike glee in finding them sometimes, such as the shovel, which you obtain through a somewhat silly interaction with this little frog boy, who explains that he needs the shovel to make sandcastles because apparently beach spades do not exist. Well, of course they do. So you go find one, and he happily trades the shovel for the far more practical beach spade. A simple, meaningless 5-minute side quest, right? Well, yes, but also no, because not only is your interaction with the frog a pleasant little moment to make you giggle like a preschooler, this is where A Short Hike offers one of its many various avenues of viable gameplay progression. Not only will the shovel enable you to find several other useful items, if you return to the frog after allowing enough time to pass by completing other similarly quaint side quests, you will notice that his small lonely sandcastle is now part of a larger cluster, and our froggy construction workhorse is now running for hypothetical mayor of the town via an imaginary election, which he then loses. But no matter, because if you then return to him for a third time after completing even more tasks, he has made even more progress, his sandcastle town now being a bona fide metropolis that he intends to rule through provincial influence, passing several controversial legislations such as free candy.
It's all there, black and white, clear as crystal.
Anyway, moving on from the politically infused daydreams of a literal frog child, the point I'm getting to is that now, after allowing enough time to pass and having completed the requirements of the side quest, you will notice a shining collectible atop one of the largest sandcastles, a golden feather. To explain the significance of this, the golden feathers are essentially your gateway ticket that unlocks the vast majority of A Short Hike secrets. You're going to need a certain number of them if you wish to scale the Hawk Peak Mountain, so your path towards the end of the game becomes gradually more feasible once you've accumulated a fair few of them. Because, in collecting the golden feathers, Claire's stamina bar increases, therefore allowing you to climb higher, sprint for longer, and flap your wings more to fly higher. All of which being pretty indispensable mechanics if you not only want to reach the top of the mountain, but also prove essential in your overall goal of collecting scattered coins, opening hidden chests, finding even more feathers, and so on. Now, don't get me wrong, not all of the quests require as much back and forthing as our frog boy here. Most are actually far more direct in terms of their objective, and usually result in obtaining the feather within 5 or so minutes. But I'm highlighting this particular character because it's a perfect example of what it's like interacting with the population of a short hike, as most, if not all of them, are similarly presented in a carefree, humor-driven manner. From the sunbathing toucan who mostly speaks in song, to Sue, the marathon running rabbit who asks you to find her lucky headband, only to then accept somebody else's once realizing it belonged to a famous runner, or the other marathon runner who screams, "Speed first, talk later," whenever you try to interact with them. Every character in this game is legitimately fun to talk to. For all the deeply emotional nature of Claire's motivation regarding her mother's condition, A Short Hike is the kind of game that really doesn't take itself too seriously, and is more than willing to allow the player a certain amount of leeway in how many feathers you need to reach the mountain peak. Case in point, while in this clip I do have a rather chunky balance of 15 feathers, I actually only needed 8 of them to reach Hawk Peak and complete the game. This is an extremely generous amount of wiggle room, and entirely falls within the parameters of what makes this game a far more relaxing experience, rather than one seeking to challenge or demand more extended playtime from you. In giving the player the opportunity to complete the game with barely 50% of its content being uncovered, what this ultimately means is that A Short Hike's gameplay structure is completely at the behest of the player's preferred exploration style. It's hardly relaxing if the game forces you to complete endless fetch quests or chase characters around the map purely for the sake of gatekeeping the end of the game and artificially stretching out its runtime. And thankfully, A Short Hike knows this. So instead, the game offers you plenty of breathing space to pick and choose the interactions that most appropriately suit the player's approach to its gameplay. You decide how you want to complete this game. If you don't want to engage in the more lengthy conversations or participate in treasure hunts, for example, you can instead complete the shorter objectives, such as finding the multitude of feathers scattered around the map or by digging them up using the shovel, or you could compete in races and beach stickball challenges, or if you've got enough coins, you could purchase the feathers from the visitor center, and then later on this shady looking dude.
You wanna buy some death sticks?
And yeah, sure, you might hear all this and immediately think, well, if there isn't any real challenge to A Short Hike, what's the point? And again, don't get me wrong, there's still plenty of exploring to do throughout this game. Even after 10 to 15 hours of casually roaming around, I was still finding things that I'd missed. But what's the point in playing something that practically gives you the means to complete the game on a silver plate? Well, similar to my reviews of games that featured virtually zero gameplay, A Short Hike is far less concerned with gameplay loops, and a lot more concerned with its emotional connection with the player. Because, above all else, experiencing A Short Hike is peaceful. There's an early interaction with one of the island inhabitants in which Claire is asked how her day is going, to which she responds that she's just getting out of the house for now, and the character, seemingly understanding where she's coming from, responds that it's simply one of those days. This right here pretty much sums up the entire point of A Short Hike. It's an escape from the demands of life to switch off your brain and relax when it's one of those kinds of days. And again, this is something it's very good at. Sure, the flight and movement controls can be a little unwieldy at times, and however long it takes you to get used to the semi-isometric format can vary from player to player, but where Adam Gryu focuses his attention is not on establishing platforming challenges or more elaborate side quests, it's instead on the tranquil presentation of the game itself. For instance, the soundtrack is absolutely wonderful. Composed by Mark Sparling of the more recently released Cursed to Golf, and bearing clear inspiration from the likes of Studio Ghibli and Animal Crossing, A Short Hike's music is such a delightfully nostalgic element to the game's overall presentation. It's so chirpy and reassuring, so musically bright and vibrant through its use of beach house accordion melodies, plucky acoustic guitars, and playful piano leads. It makes you smile and keeps the atmosphere of the game at such a consistently upbeat and cheerful level. However, the closer you get to the peak of the mountain, you will notice there is a noticeable shift in the tone of the soundtrack, becoming more adventurous and dramatic. You really start to feel the weight of the journey surrounding you, jumping from snow-covered cliffsides to scrambling up the sheer face of another. It all builds up to that moment of anticipation, where you might finally turn a corner and then find yourself scaling that mountaintop for good. It's so gorgeously mesmerizing. Gliding through the air, wandering through the trees, or swimming through the water, none of it would have had even the slightest amount of such intoxicating resonance with the player if it wasn't for the beautifully composed soundtrack paired with it, which speaks to a short hike's greatest asset above all else: the tremendous amount of heart on display throughout this game. From meeting the track runner in search of their lucky headband, who then goes on to realise that it wasn't even the headband at all that led to her success, but her own ability and persistence, to the artist who keeps popping up in various locations throughout the island in search of inspiration, yet keeps questioning their worth as an artist and as an individual, all to the moment where our dodgy looking fella confesses that the reason he's selling the feathers is actually to pay for schooling. There is so much heart and joy in the world of a short hike. Speaking to these characters and exploring the game is never a dull venture. There's always another reason to smile, to laugh at the silliness of it all, but it can also be really impactful. To sidetrack speaking to the characters for a moment, there's also this point towards the game where you use an intense updraft to launch Claire into the air, after which you just spend a couple of minutes gently floating downwards, soaring throughout the island free as a bird. The music swelling wonderfully around you, and God, I feel like this script can just keep going on and on and on. I'm not going to tell you everything because I want you to play this game. But before I do go, let me tell you a little story. And FYI, this is going to start leading into the endgame spoilers, so please bear that in mind. My first playthrough of a short hike lasted roughly an hour and a half. From stepping outside Claire's house, to learning the game's mechanics, to working through the task required to finding the feathers, and therefore making it to the top of the mountain. And that hour and a half was honestly really enthralling. Well before the halfway point, I'd completely fallen in love with the game's presentation, with its music and relaxed approach to the gameplay mechanics, and in finally reaching the top of the mountain and seeing the concluding character interaction, I was completely invested in Claire's story from beginning to end. So, upon completing a short hike, my immediate response was to jump straight back into New Game Plus, which allows you to continue exploring the game in an organic manner that makes complete sense within its narrative structure, because it's just another day on the island. But now, after having completed the game and starting a new day, there were additional character interactions and other collectibles to find that I hadn't located previously. So, off I go. I wander around the island, picking up the occasional extra feather and completing the odd side quest, before soon deciding to climb Hawk Peak again. I was curious as to whether or not I could make it to the top faster than I had before, and I do get there at a surprisingly brisk pace, until upon making it towards the peak of the mountain again, I meet a character who had previously given Claire some advice on how to potentially overcome a collapsed section of the journey. They marvel at the fact that Claire had managed to make it to the peak, and asks if you could show them the way forwards. Except the sad reality of this is that the only way up until the bridge is repaired is by flying, because this character is a fox. The only way that they can reach the top is by climbing, and they don't have enough feathers yet to do so. Except this is where Claire now offers the fox a deal, to lend them 6 feathers in exchange for a photo on the mountaintop, after which the fox agrees to return the feathers once the journey is completed. This is a decision entirely left to the player. You don't have to do this. And for a brief second, I honestly had to think about it. Getting those 6 feathers took a lot of time, so to suddenly lose such a high quantity really feels like a decision with some weight behind it. Regardless of how quick the side quests are, you've worked hard to get those feathers. What if you never get them back? What if in giving them to the fox, you can't make it to the top again? What if that means I have to then spend the next 30 minutes scrambling around looking for more feathers before I can? I don't want to have to do that. There's also the fact that exploring the mountain is made even more challenging due to the fact that your feathers freeze after use, therefore preventing them from naturally recharging until you find a source of warmth and thaw them out. The more feathers you have on hand while working through this place makes it all the more feasible to get around. But wait a sec. If it wasn't for the advice of the fox, I might have never made it in the first place. I kind of owed it to the fox. And so did Claire. Because when Claire does reach this point for the first time on her own and sits down at the end of the game to enjoy the view, her phone rings. This was such a beautiful way to end Claire's main storyline. Not only is the character writing absolutely pitch perfect in reflecting a difficult conversation between a concerned daughter and the recovering mother, you really sense Claire's relief here. Her reaction combined with the music felt so genuine, as if a simmering tension being carried by Claire throughout the game had suddenly lifted from the moment she answered the phone. And for me, that's a reaction I'm very familiar with. To mark a slight disclaimer, I don't like to make too much of a habit talking about my personal life throughout these videos. Not only do I not find them all that relevant, I'm shy and I like to remain as anonymous as possible. But as you might have guessed from the video's introduction when I mentioned that certain parts of this hit home for me, I do want to talk about something before we round this one off. I want to talk about my short hike. When I was a teenager, like Claire, one of my parents suffered a sudden and extremely life-threatening hospitalization. I remember coming home from school and heading up to my room, before soon being called downstairs to be told the news that one of my parents had been involved in a serious vehicular accident. To be told that at that exact point in time, they didn't know if they'd survived. To be told I might not have one of my parents anymore. And that news felt like the most numbing fucking sledgehammer to my stomach that I've ever felt. I remember going back to my room and just sitting there, wordless. My best friend who happened to be there at the time, not knowing what to do or what to say, and me not knowing if he was even saying anything at all. I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't see beyond a few inches in front of my face. I couldn't move. So I just sat there, the clock ticking away minute after minute, waiting for the next moment, waiting for news and not knowing what that news was going to be. Waiting for that phone call. And then it rings. So, we now fast forward. I'm sitting in front of my PC, and both of my parents are alive and well through the closest thing to a miracle that I can describe, and I'm now replaying a short hike. A fox has just asked me for some feathers, and all of a sudden it seems so very easy to give them up, to say yes even in spite of the work and the effort it took to get them. Because, and this might sound extremely dramatic, and for that I apologize, if I hadn't made it, I may have never seen the game's ending. An ending that resonated with me so much and dug so deeply into me. For that I felt genuinely grateful. So I trade them. The fox makes it, Claire joins him for a photo, and they just share this really sweet, tender moment together, basking in the awe and wonder of the aurora lights. And just look at how wonderfully animated this place is. The mix of color and swirling winds around you, creating this incredible sense of euphoria. Two adventurous souls marveling at the world around them and their ability to reach it. It was such a lovely little moment, and one that was entirely reserved for the New Game Plus portion of the story. If I hadn't replayed the game, if I just put it down and never touched it again, I would have never seen this. So to have made that decision, to then lend the feathers and spend those minutes atop the mountain, sharing that achievement with another character, it honestly felt kind of special. I can't recall the last time a game made me feel like this. It brought so much light in so many ways, so much levity of spirit and relaxation, all while handling a subject extremely personal and extremely real. After the Silent Hill 3 video, I burnt out horribly. I felt so disillusioned with YouTube, so disillusioned with making these videos. Until I played A Short Hike, that feeling was so absent from me. But once I saw all this, it just came flooding back. The characters felt like the friends needed at those times in our lives. The world of the game felt like this perfect distraction from the realities beyond it. A time capsule of innocence and joy to wash away the world around you. It reminded me of the people there for me throughout my short hike, throughout one of the darkest points in any person's life. But it's the people around you who keep you afloat in those moments, who offer you a helping hand and say something, anything, even if it doesn't really help at all. Because in those moments you're surrounded by nothing but the void of uncertainty, of not knowing, checking your phone. That is a feeling from my childhood that I will never, ever forget. It is one I've carried with me for bordering on 20 years, and throughout those minutes that keep on ticking by, the shortest hike can feel like the longest in the world. Moments like that change you forever. But even the longest hikes have an ending, and in the end, it'll be okay. You'll overcome the mountain. You'll find a new light in your world, even if it's in the most unexpected places. You will smile again. So to round this video off, I now only have one more thing to say. A short hike is beautiful. Hey folks, thanks for watching the video. I'd like to thank my incredible top Patreon supporters, Game Master, DarkRaptor86, BFD Survivor, and Shikatsky. I'd also like to thank everyone who checked out the Silent Hill 3 video. Your comments have been incredible. While I can't promise when the next video will be, I'll see you on the next one. Take care everybody.